In business today, three things to know. First, iWatch, iPhone, are they iHits? Analysts say Apple, the world's largest company, needs a big score. Did it get it today with today's product launch? Then, winds of secession. Europe is in a panic that Scotland may vote to leave the United Kingdom.
A little revolution now and then is a healthy thing, don't you think?
Sean Connery actually supports Scottish independence. If the Scots vote yes, what will it mean for the Eurozone economy? And the Ray Rice fallout, the cost to the Baltimore Ravens and the NFL. Arise Exchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. It is always one of the most watched consumer events for Apple lovers, Apple haters, and, of course, Apple shareholders. The most valuable company in the world, based on market cap, unveiled its new products at its headquarters in Cupertino, California. Here is a rundown. Two new iPhones announced today, the iPhone 6 and the iPhone 6 Plus. The iPhone 6 will start at $199 with a 4.7-inch screen. The iPhone 6 Plus starts at $299 and will be supersized to 5.5-inch screen. Apple also unveiling a mobile payment platform called Apple Pay. That's going to take on PayPal very significantly. And the long-awaited Apple Watch is now here. Shares of Apple first moved higher on the announcements, but then pulled back, closing down 37 cents to 97.99. Here is Apple CEO Tim Cook.
Today, we are launching the biggest advancement in the history of iPhone. And I couldn't be more excited and more proud to show it to you now. They are without a doubt the best iPhones we've ever done, and I hope you'll agree they're the best phones you have ever seen.
Apple announcements are always like a religious revival event. David Garrity is principal with GVA Research and here to talk about all things Apple. This was a big deal for Tim Cook, a lot riding on it. How did he do?
Tim Cook actually came away very, very well. There were a lot of expectations going into this announcement. It wasn't just the phone, and it wasn't just the watch, and it wasn't just the Apple Wallet, the Apple Pay that's coming out. There were some other expectations where we didn't necessarily see announcements. Obviously, IBM, as a strategic partner, which was announced back over the summer, arguably could play a very major role in terms of Apple's ability to take the greater amounts of customer data that they're going to be gathering and doing a far better job in terms of data analytics on this in order for Apple to monetize that.
Data mining, basically.
Data mining.
Right?
We're familiar with IBM in terms of what they've done with Watson.
Do you think Apple didn't talk too much about that today because of the security breaches?
No, I think Apple will have the chance to come back and talk further about it because clearly IBM is a company that knows a great deal about security. And from that standpoint, to the extent that Apple has had their own issues around the iCloud breach, if they can say, look, we have IBM as an enterprise class partner backing us up, that can serve to basically elevate their profile from the standpoint of security.
So for Apple, two sort of separate issues here. First, in the smartphone category, larger screens because they're finally facing the reality that Samsung devices are gaining popularity, for a while at least.
Anybody who was out there basically selling a phone that was anywhere from 5.3 to 5.7 inches was basically gaining market share. And yes, Samsung was the leader in that regard. And one could say that to the extent that Samsung came out with the form factor first, Apple wasn't necessarily innovating. And so to the extent that Cook was now sort of saying, okay, fine, you're coming out with a 5.5-inch phone. You're going to have more than just a 5.5-inch phone. You're going to have other innovative services. So to the extent that they also came out with the watch. Now, granted, Samsung has also come out with a large-size smartphone kind of wrist device combination.
It's interesting that the tablets are getting smaller and the watches are now getting bigger. So they're kind of going in opposite directions. Regarding the watch, they're not going to have this out until 2015. Some analysts, and I don't know why people keep underestimating the company, but some analysts say people aren't going to buy Apple Watches, that they're simply not going to have enough to them, and they're expensive, about $399.
Well, it's interesting if you look at millennials as a demographic, and you look at what their concerns are around personal health. Some of the applications that you're going to find available through the Apple Watch, and to the extent that it integrates with the Apple iPhone, it's going to be very, very compelling, I think. You have, wearable technologies from other companies such as a Jawbone and such. Obviously, Apple's moves here with the watch and the iPhone 6 potentially make those offerings obsolete.
And the real game changer is that the watch is going to have a sort of health component to it, right? It can monitor your heart rate. It can do some other things.
Very much so. And to the extent, as I said earlier, that the demographics in terms of millennials, people who are buying these types of products have these concerns. It does a very good job of meeting that need.
For the Apple Wallet, for the Apple Pay situation, eBay is the company that was the big loser today, wasn't it? Because it owns PayPal, and there was a lot of talk that this is really going to put significant pressure on eBay.
Certainly, it's going to be a loser for PayPal because if you look how PayPal is set up, the transaction fees that consumers have operating off of PayPal are fairly expensive. Apple's actually getting in with Apple Pay at a fairly low price to the consumer. So from that standpoint, yes, I would expect on balance we're going to have greater adoption with respect to Apple.
Its stock pulled back a little bit today. Where do you see the stock price going? There still is a good argument if you look at how much cash the company has in the bank that the stock remains undervalued. That's what a lot of analysts are saying.
Yeah, the stock sells at a below market multiple. We think that earnings estimates are going to rise for 2015, 2016 after today's announcement. So from that standpoint, you're seeing accelerating growth rates. I think that Apple clearly is a value stock now, but we think that there is the opportunity off the back of these announcements today to see momentum return to the name.
You don't personally own the stock, but your family owns some of the shares.
That's right.
Just for
have a $125 price target over the next 6 to 12 months.
Okay. And for Apple to hit that price target, though, is obviously going to have to sell a bunch of these watches. Is that the key thing you're going to look at?
Not the watches. I mean, the main profit driver as far as Apple is concerned are the iPhones. And the fact that the company has said that they're going to start shipping these devices.
It's about half of its revenue,
It's actually
right?
a little bit more than half of it. And as far as the margins are concerned, the margins on the iPhones are the highest.
And that's something to watch, though, because with the bigger screens, the different price point, there might be some margin pressure there a little bit. Why, when there's so many things to talk about in the world right now, if you're looking at, and we're leading the show with this, CNBC, I think, spent 7 hours of wall-to-wall coverage on it today. Why does this company still fascinate so many people?
The company fascinates people because if we look from the standpoint of consumers, I mean, Apple is a company has been sufficiently successful. They have credit card information on 800 million individuals. Their customer base drives 80% of the spending that takes place off of mobile devices worldwide right now. This is a very desirable demographic. No other company, I'd make the argument, could have been as successful in rolling out in a digital wallet as Apple could be, because everybody else that's out there is trying to compete against each other. Only Apple basically
has the ecology.
Correct.
The
has the ecology and the customer base to basically bring together all these otherwise competing parties.
Okay, David Garrity, good analysis, principal at GBA Research. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Apple, of course, the big stock that the markets watch today, but overall another drop as the Dow records back-to-back declines. Here are the final numbers. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 97.55. That's off its lows for the day. The S&P 500 pulling back as well, and the NASDAQ back 40 to 45.52. Some of the top stocks we're watching today. Krispy Kreme reporting a miss in their second quarter earnings per share of 8 cents, were just half of what analysts expected. Krispy Kreme closing down 6 cents. Its earnings came after the bell, though. That stock number does not necessarily reflect it. General Mills has agreed to purchase organic food maker Annie's. The California-based all-natural farm was sold to Gen Mills for $820 million. General Mills closing down to $53.17. And McDonald's says its sales are down across all regions this year. Its quarterly earnings report predicting further losses after a scandal hit its China supplier regarding its meat. McDonald's closing down $1.41. People eating less burgers, people eating less donuts. Maybe there's a theme there. And looking at commodities, gold up and oil moving back up 9 cents to 92.75. Two pieces of economic news today. The job openings and labor turnover rate, also known as JOLTS, or how do you feel about your job, remained virtually unchanged for August. There were just under 4.7 million job openings, according to the Labor Department. And confidence among small businesses edged higher last month. The index by the National Federation of Independent Businesses rose 0.4 to 96.1, suggesting some cautious optimism that business will improve. Coming up, will a vote to break away spell economic chaos for Scotland and Europe? You're watching Arise Exchange from New York.
The great thing about Arise Entertainment 360 is that we cover the 360 of entertainment, food, fashion, lifestyle, culture. We're able to cover it all. And the thing I love most about the show is we're able to do a stunning combination of high and low. So we can talk about Rihanna on the red carpet, but we can also speak about high art with people like Sanford Biggers and Hank Willis. We actually spend quality time with our guests, and we really get to know them. It's really intriguing because we get a 360 look at our guests.
Last week on Arise Exchange. Are you ready for some football? The NFL money machine gears up.
It's a dicey situation when you look at how much money is being funneled in and how much money they're taking.
There is a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russian separatists. They have stopped shooting at each other. We call that progress. The owner of the Java Jugs coffee shop has pleaded guilty to offering a daily dose of caffeine and sex, giving her customers a little extra jolt with their coffee. Watch this week for more Arise Exchange. Great Scott, Scotland may vote to go it alone. Recent polls show that a majority of the Scottish now support independence from the United Kingdom, sparking fears that breaking away will cause economic ruin for Scotland and maybe even for Europe. Why do they want to leave and what is at stake? Gabe Borenstein is managing director at Enclave Capital, and he joins us now. An election coming up in just a couple of weeks. Do you think right now that the Scottish are going to vote for independence?
The polls seem to indicate that the Yes party has a 2% advantage over the No's. However, realistically speaking, there are major issues that most likely will deflect that possibility.
There has been certainly a change in the polls. It was down by 20 points, and I guess that's what's worrying people is there's a surge, sort of a nationalistic feel out there. There's been some criticism of those proposing that Scotland break away, saying it could be the next Canada. But there is a significant difference between the two countries. What would the impact be immediately if Scotland went ahead and did this?
My impression is that there would be a major banking problem. Mr. Carney.
They don't have a central bank.
Well, but more importantly, Mr. Carney, as well, who's the head of the Bank of England, as well as Mr. Osborne, Chancellor of Exchequer, did indicate that Scotland would not be able to use sterling as a currency.
And Scotland says it's going to use the pound sterling. It doesn't have really an option. They're going to have to print some money from somewhere.
Well, the euro was suggested, but they're not members of euro as well.
Right.
And my feeling is if the Bank of England and Chancellor of Exchequer believes that Scotland cannot use sterling, it is a major issue, especially since Scotland would have to assume proportionally percentage of the national debt, which amounts to about 111 billion sterling. But then Mr. Alex Salmond, First Minister of Scotland, did say that if they cannot use sterling, they will default immediately.
So it's like we go into business and we're filing for bankruptcy the next day.
And you can imagine the financial and monetary sequential case.
And the Bank of England would ultimately have to bail them out is probably what would happen, whether they're like it or not.
But in interim, since we're talking about a new independent country, there would be incredible chaos.
Why do the Scottish want to go it alone?
I think they wanted autonomy for a very long time. And in fact, some of it is recognized by the leadership of UK, because all of a sudden you see that Scotland is being offered greater autonomy in the discussions prior to the election, which involves taxation, budgetary issues, schooling, etc. So perhaps in the last minute, there will be enough concession granting Scotland autonomy. So at least for now, the topic will be delayed.
Let me take the other side of it, though. Scotland has a bunch of oil. Scotland wants independence. And maybe they're willing to suffer the short-term consequences. And the question is the economy big enough to support itself as a country if you were to say, take a 5-year or 10-year horizon here?
Perhaps 10-year horizon as an incremental process, that would be doable. However, initially, again, you're back to chaos. You are an independent country without standard currency. If you want to become part of the EU, you're a long way away.
The EU is not looking to take on new basket cases.
Plus, you have, again, issue of national debt. How do you address the issue of $111 billion of sterling? Believe it or not, Scotland receives net of about 17.6 billion sterling subsidy from UK.
Do you think that the British and the UK has sort of been doing a bad public relations stance here in trying to explain their position to give Scotland more autonomy, to give Wales maybe more autonomy, because there's a little bit of a worry of a domino effect here?
Not really. I think the greatest, the most important issue is that it has taken the yes vote, taking a majority support in order to elicit some sort of a concession from the UK. That should have been probably an initiative taken by the Prime Minister a while ago and gradually worked into the acceptance of Scotland's voters.
Okay. Gabe Borenstein, thank you so much. We'll have you back on when the vote comes in a couple of weeks.
You got it. Thank you.
Okay, good to see you. Stay right there. Taking a look at some of our business ticker stories making headlines across the nation and the world. Home Depot has been hacked. The home improvement retailer now confirms that hackers have broken into its payment system, possibly as far back as April. The breach may have exposed credit card information of millions of shoppers at its U.S. and Canadian stores. At this point, it does not appear shoppers on HomeDepot.com were impacted. Home Depot says it will offer free credit monitoring services for affected customers. Russia is feeling the pressure of international sanctions for its military activity in Ukraine. Russian oil giant Rosneft, which is feeling the brunt of sanctions, says it could cut a quarter of its staff and needs $40 billion in state aid. Meantime, the European Union has agreed to further penalties, though the EU is delaying those to see if the ceasefire in Ukraine holds. Russia says it may restrict airspace if further sanctions are imposed. A long jail sentence for the man behind a massive insider trading scheme at SAC Capital. Matthew Martoma was sentenced today to 9 years in prison. Martoma earned SAC $275 million in what authorities call the most lucrative insider trading scheme in history. SAC is the firm run by Stephen A. Cohen. Lawyers for Martoma said that they will appeal the conviction. And a restaurant in Baltimore is trading pizza for the jersey of former Ravens running back Ray Rice. Hirsch's Pizza Shop is offering customers free pizza if they turn in their jersey. Rice was released by the Ravens yesterday after a hotel video surfaced of him beating his wife unconscious. Later, we'll speak with Andrew Rosario on what all of this is costing the Ravens and the NFL. On Wednesday evening, President Obama intends to make his pitch for taking out the terrorist group known as ISIS and ISIL. Mr. Obama has a lot riding on the speech as he addresses the nation. Arise News senior Washington correspondent Colin Campbell joins us from D.C. with more. Colin, what do we expect to hear from the president tomorrow night?
Hi, Andrew. Well, the president will definitely talk about how he plans to address the threat of ISIS going across the border from Iraq into Syria. If we remember, the president has been criticized over saying that he didn't have a strategy. Of course, the White House quickly trying to defend that statement by saying that the president didn't have a proper strategy over how to deal with ISIS when it comes to dealing with Syria simultaneously. We already know about strikes that are happening in Iraq, about 150 airstrikes already. The president and the White House, of course, already addressing that issue in Iraq and trying to work with the Iraqi government to form a coalition government to put more strength and focus on ISIS, as the president does not want to commit any U.S. troops on the ground. The White House being very firm in saying that any boots on the ground would have to come from coalition forces in that area and not the U.S. government. So the president, again, will be talking to the U.S. about how he plans to address the growing threat of ISIS as it crawls over the border into the United States, especially since the U.S. was once working with some members of ISIS, ISIL, or as the group calls itself, the Islamic State, when it comes to battling the Assad regime over there.
Yeah, it's actually a very difficult position because he can't probably enlist the Assad regime. That's probably off the table. What is he talking to Congress about? Is there a sense that he's going to ask for authorization, and does he need it, to attack, to launch airstrikes in Syria?
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to address that you said, Andrew, is that we wouldn't be working with Syria. Some experts have believed that the president may use back-channel access to work with the Assad regime in trying to fight back against the group calling itself the Islamic State. But it's unclear, of course, whether or not that will definitely happen. And it is very clear that the White House won't be as transparent if that actually does happen. Now, he did just get out of a meeting with some leading members of Congress. It's very unclear whether or not he will ask for congressional authorization because of the fact that the scope of the operation, which is most likely limited to airstrikes, many say the president doesn't need congressional approval. However, there are some people in Congress that are asking and urging the president to work with Congress in the authorization. Many say that they would authorize the president's use of force in Syria. But again, it's very unclear whether the president will take that method because of the fact that he is facing some very low approval ratings right now and how he's dealing with his foreign policy. And he doesn't want that, the White House doesn't want that, to get mired down in politics if it goes to some type of congressional vote.
Low approval ratings, but there does seem to be, according to the polls, support for the airstrike. So what do you think the president is basically going to try to sell the American public tomorrow on what has to happen here?
I think he's going to try to sell the American public on the fact that there needs to be airstrikes, even across the border into Syria. Of course, he will tell the American public that this would most likely be a protracted air campaign, that it's not going to be something that's done overnight. At the same time, he will try to reassure the American public that there will not be boots on the ground, that the U.S. will not be embroiled in another war, and that he will be getting support from a coalition government in Iraq.
Okay, Colin, Campbell in Washington, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Ahead, a lousy tipping NFL star is our favorite person of the day. You're watching Arise Exchange.
I think that people in America do care about what happens throughout the world.
Global warming is probably something that has to be addressed sooner rather than later.
In Somalia and the genocide there, and that's something people don't know about. They have no idea the brevity of that situation.
The first thing I think about when I think of Africa is like war and famine and disease.
And right now with the tsunami that happened or the earthquakes in, Japan, we always look out for other people.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
I think media and reporters have a lot to answer for.
AIDS, hunger, people not having running water, the things that we just take for granted.
I think the most important issues in the world today are education and poverty.
Terrorism and war, I guess, is always. It's always an issue, and the quality of life of certain groups of people in certain areas.
I think inequality.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Time now for our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention, and not for the right reasons. Today, it is another NFL star, not for his amoral criminal behavior, but rather for being a cheapskate SOB. Eagles running back LaShawn McCoy allegedly left all of a 20-cent tip on a $61 bill at a Philadelphia restaurant. The burger spot, PYT, posted the receipt for the meal on its Facebook page, so there. You can see clearly that McCoy left a tip that comes to 0.3%, slightly less than the customary 15 to 20%. The waiter that served McCoy and his friends say he wasn't surprised by the tip since the group was, quote, loud and rude. The 25-year-old pro running back has a 5-year contract with the Eagles worth $45 million. None of this surprises us because he is, after all, a Philadelphia Eagle. And so, LaShawn McCoy, that's coming from a Giant fan, sorry, is our favorite NFL running back of the day. Coming up next, the cost of cutting Ray Rice. You're watching Arise Exchange. Informative, the U.S. economy is on the right path, and the wizard of the Fed is leading the way.
We started our companies originally to create something that made a positive difference.
Compelling.
I became very successful, not allowing myself to be average.
Our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention, and not for the right reason. Yeah, he sort of lost all business. Investors came back from the long weekend tanned, rested, and ready to buy stocks. Entertaining money daily, Arise Exchange.
news can definitely be improved when reflecting diversity.
A lot of mainstream news, they don't dive into it.
Who wants to hear about negativity all the time?
They only show what they think people want to know and not what people really should know.
World-based stories, that's what I enjoy the most.
I think diversity of news is important to the world so that everybody will be aware of their surroundings and what is happening today.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
It has already cost the NFL in terms of its reputation, but how much money will the Ray Rice debacle cost the Baltimore Ravens and the league? Andrew Rosario, Arise News sports contributor, joins us now to tell us the latest. So what, by the way, is the latest for the economic impact for Rice?
Well, we've just found out that Nike terminated his contract, and EA Sports are taking away all likeness from the Madden video game. So those are the two latest things.
You know, the only thing we should say here is there clearly isn't a zero tolerance for domestic violence, though, because it took a video, even after he already pleaded guilty to hitting his now wife. And there's an argument that, you know, whether you slap your girlfriend or whether you beat her up, there's no real difference. It's domestic violence.
And there are two other players right now currently that are on teams, one with the 49ers and one with the Cowboys, that have charges against them, pending against them, and depending on what they find out, what the investigation reveals, is going to determine what goes on.
So what does this do for the Ravens? What's the hit to the bottom line?
Well, you know, they get hit with a salary cap, $4.8 million this year, $9.5 million next year, and what that does is it limits them in terms of free agents that they may want to sign. So that's the immediate hit right now.
But they also paid him a lot of money.
Right. He had signed a 5-year contract for $35 million. 22 of it was guaranteed, but that all gets wiped away as a result of him being cut.
And because it's guaranteed, that part of it, they already have to give it to him, or if they've given it to him already.
That is correct.
Has the NFL done a better job at sort of vetting players at all? I mean, is there a process where we know somebody may be a troublemaker and maybe we shouldn't give him an $18 million signing bonus?
See, that's the big thing. You know, when these guys are coming out of college, they get vetted extensively. They have ex-FBI players going into their backgrounds. But this is a situation where no one really could have seen this coming. He did not have a reputation of doing things like this. And it happened, and now he's paying the consequences.
And for the league itself, for the NFL, is there a financial impact here?
Not really. I mean, this is a billion-dollar industry. You know, all of these teams are sold out for years, so that money is guaranteed. The television revenues, the sales of jerseys, concessions, everything.
And by the way, we could talk about all the outrage. We could talk about the outrage regarding Rice. We could talk about whether you want the Redskins to change the name. And yet, when it comes to 12:30 on a Sunday afternoon, it doesn't matter. The fans keep watching. Is there a problem there?
You know, the problem is the perception that the NFL, first of all, dropped the ball from the very beginning, just issuing a 2-game suspension, knowing what he did, and then to find out that they did not know anything about the video. I said weeks ago when this first happened that if there was a video of something that happened outside of the elevator, there surely had to be a video of something that happened inside the elevator. Why they did not get access to that video? Did they turn a blind eye? Did they think that the 2-game suspension was going to just satisfy everybody? We don't know.
And what's the future of Roger Goodell here? Clearly, this is the darkest day for his commissionership.
People are calling for his head, and you know, depending on...
He's paid about $30 million a year.
Yes, he is. And remember, he's voted by the owners. So the only way that he would either resign or the owners would determine whether or not they're going to dismiss him. So right now, it doesn't look good for him.
It's really the tale of two commissioners with Adam Silver and Roger Goodell right now.
Well, you know, when Roger Goodell first came on board, he was judge, jury, and executioner. And now that seems to have changed a little bit, and that's why everybody's having a hard time, because of the fact that this is not just an NFL problem, this is a societal problem. And for them to deal with it the way they did, they clearly dropped the ball.
You know, let me ask you this. If the penalty for being an outright racist, like Donald Sterling, and for making offensive remarks, no matter what level you want to put it on, for the Atlanta Hawks owner, is basically the death penalty, meaning sell your team. How is there not a penalty for allowing people who beat up their wives, girlfriends, etc., any penalty against the owners of this team?
Well, you know, you really can't hold it against the owners because the players are the ones that ultimately, you know, do these deeds, unfortunately. And with the Sterling thing, we all saw how that turned out, and we all saw the ramifications of those comments. But when it comes to individual players, it's hard to hold owners, general managers accountable for what players do off the field.
Because it's just their employees and you don't know. Finally,
Exactly.
the NFL, the league is a tax-exempt organization somehow. And Congress sometimes looks at that. Do you think there might be pressure here to change it?
Well, the only thing that the teams do have to pay taxes.
Sure.
The league itself does not pay taxes because they're sort of an administrator of the league. But
an association.
An association, exactly. So all of the revenues that these teams make, again, from sales, TV, radio, sponsorships, they get taxed on that.
Okay, Andrew Rosario, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, tomorrow on Arise Exchange, the big business of cops writing speeding tickets. We'll look at the worst offenders in the nation and how to avoid them. Let's take a look at the markets once again on the day that Apple made its big announcement, red across the board. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching Arise Exchange. We'll see you tomorrow.